question and a comment to Ronald. Alexander Jäger, University of Applied Science of Austria. You did cite my work at the end. I can agree to your conclusion that beer is an appropriate drink for rehydration. And I also, like you, can say that beer is absolutely not a sports drink due to lack of sodium. But we always also have to say that water is not a sports drink due to absolute lack of sodium. We examined different kinds of beer, and the best sports drink, but it's not a sport drink, would be alcohol-free, non-filtered white beer due to higher content of sodium. And so, as you stated, what you have to do, or what the sportsmen are doing, they just eat pure sodium chloride in form of capsules when they drink beer after the competition. But we don't have to do it. And now we came back to the talk of Demosthenes this morning, to his second last slide, when he showed the combination of the eating habitudes of the beer drinkers, and the meal they prefer are absolutely the salty meals like pork, like lamb, like chips. And so people don't need really the recommendations of all our scientists. They just make it since decades, since centuries, just in the way they have to do it. If they drink beer, they eat salty things. And if we go back to Austria, we have these beer pretzels with the salt on it, and that's like people do all the time. And what we should do, or the beer brewers should do, is invent the beer as sports drinks. So, but the difficulty is just to put 30 grams of sodium chloride in half a pint of beer, and then it would be the perfect sports drink. So there is some work to do for the brewers. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. I would say you certainly don't want to put sodium chloride in too much concentration, because the taste is extremely unpleasant. But there are other sodium salts you can use which are much less salty than sodium chloride. And this is what you do with oral rehydration solutions intended for the treatment of diarrhea. You have some sodium bicarbonate, you have some sodium citrate, you possibly have some sodium lactate, and there are various other salts that you can add, because it does seem to be sodium that's the primary factor. And of course, you make a very important point. If you drink very large volumes of fluid, whatever the fluid is, you'll produce a large volume of urine. Inevitably, in that urine, you will pull out some sodium. So if you're going to spend the evening drinking 10 liters of beer, you're going to have some salt in order to maintain your fluid balance, whether you've exercised or not. But if you have previously exercised and lost substantial amounts of salt, then we have to consider whether we need to add significant amounts of salt to the diet. And it does raise an issue in terms of the recommendations for salt intake for cardiovascular protection. We recommend in the UK no more than 6 grams of salt a day. But if you're sweating 20 grams a day during heavy training, you won't survive on 6 grams a day for very long. So perhaps the answer is to encourage people to be more physically active, which will reduce potentially some of the harmful effects of a high salt intake, as well as some of the other effects. Thank you.
There's another.
Hello, yes, Raman, I wanted to ask you, why have you put drinkers of 15 and 70 grams all together in one group?
Yes, the problem is that our recommendation was to continue with a moderate amount, but some people drink more than our recommendations. So, but in the paper we exclude the people who was in the highest level of intake.
Because the health outcomes of somebody drinking 25 grams a day against somebody drinking 60 grams a day is going to be completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. The mean was around in this group around 25 or more or less, with some people in the upper limit, but all the people was moderate dose. But what was important, or our finding is that when we cut in 15, people who was who drink more than 15 grams a day and eat a low-fat diet has an increased risk of several issues. But if you drink this amount on the umbrella of a Mediterranean diet, the risk was absolutely different. So our thinking is that you cannot separate wine, beer, or whatever out of the diet and out of the dietary habits. So it's really very, very important. So we cannot analyze only beer or only wine. You have to be analyzed in which context.
No, I'm not interested in the beverage specific. I'm interested in the dose and why you chose 15 grams.
So, but the effect of the dose was different if you drink this amount under Mediterranean diet or you drink and in a low-fat diet was absolutely different.
I have a question for Professor De Gaetano. If I don't follow a Mediterranean diet, but a Dutch diet or a British diet, does that mean that you suggest I shouldn't drink at all? If I don't follow a Mediterranean diet, but a Dutch diet or a British diet, does that mean that I shouldn't drink at all because your cancer risk then increases tremendously?
The data belonging to the Predimed trial are related to high alcohol consumption. But if you drink moderately, you don't need necessarily to follow Mediterranean diet. Okay? What is interesting in the Predimed data is that even the well-known harmful effects of heavy alcohol consumption can be moderated, can be reduced, or can be even eliminated if this consumption is made in the context where antioxidant, fibers, content of olive oils, components, and all other kinds of benefit related to Mediterranean food is considered. And this is the novelty of the data, not an obligation of drink wine or beer in the context of Mediterranean diet. It would be better, but it is not compulsory.
Is there another question from the audience?
Yeah, this question is for Dr. Giovanni. It's not related to wine or beer, but I was surprised that if I am not wrong with legumes, the effect was negative for diabetes. What is this? Legumes consumption had a negative effect on diabetes in the Modigliani study. Is that right?
If
in legumes, when you take legumes.
Sure.
It was surprising. Well, it's not related.
You don't need an oculist because you have noted what we consider a marginal data, but which is very important. We don't know why, in this anatomy of the effects of different foods components, legumes not only were not associated with benefit, but apparently were giving an arm to the context of diet. I don't know.
No, for us it's surprising.
No. You are right, and the data exists epidemiologically. It should be investigated in more detail. We have no explanation at the moment.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, no.
One of the repeated themes today that surprised me quite a lot is that the links between alcohol, or specifically beer, and morbidity and mortality seem to have a lot more to do with diet than they do to number of units of alcohol. That seems to be coming out in a lot of different talks. So my first question is that correct? The second thing that I wasn't quite clear about all day is whether or not the effect of being a heavy drinker being connected with also being a continuing or heavy smoker has been cancelled out here. I know in a lot of the old data, when they were trying to prove health links between heavy drinking and major health problems, you had to account for the amount of smoking. And once you'd accounted for the amount of smoking, the effect of the alcohol went down really quite a lot. I wasn't sure from today's presentations how much that had been counted in.
I am sorry, but I have a certain age and I not always hear well.
Okay,
So,
where your data, like a lot of the data from other speakers today,
Yes.
showed that heavy drinking is associated with a
harmful
large amount of
effects.
cancer.
Yes, yes.
Was the smoking habits of heavy drinkers as opposed to light drinkers, was that accounted for? Because heavy drinkers have a greater tendency to be smokers or heavy smokers.
Yeah, I may answer. Of course, that is important, smoking and another kind of toxics. In all of our studies, we monitor for and control for these variables. So in the Predimed, 15% of the people were smokers. There were no very heavy drinkers because we exclude really alcoholics and people and heavy drinkers. But in all of our statistical analysis, always we control for smoking and diet and exercise and whatever. But absolutely, that smoke is really an important confounding factor in all this history. Absolutely, I agree. Okay, the last question.
Is it for the first presentation? Is there any study showing if beer consumption after exercise can help to replenish glycogen stores in muscles or liver?
The question was about whether beer consumption will help restore glycogen, and in fact the exact opposite is true. If the alcohol intake is high, you will impair glycogen synthesis, and there's also some evidence you'll impair protein synthesis. There's some debate as to whether that's caused by the fact that when people consume high amounts of alcohol, they tend to exclude carbohydrate and protein from their diet. Or whether there's a direct effect of alcohol. There does seem to be a small direct effect of alcohol, but a much more important fact is that if people consume too much alcohol, they tend to forget about their other eating priorities. So I think the message again is sensible drinking and sensible diet.
Okay, we now have more time for questions. Thank you very much for the speakers and the audience. Thank you.